work just seem like this thing that you do for someone else. You know, you work for someone else, you make someone else rich. You work in horrible, artificially lit environments that like murder animals on production lines. That's what work seemed like to me in my first experiences. We spend copious amounts of our days at work, copious amounts of our lives at work. They should be decent places that we're happy enough to come to. We're masters of our own destinies in worker cooperatives. We're co-owners together, we weather storms together. If there's a crisis, we get our boots on, get it sorted together. That's part of who we are.
Today's guest is Beau Bulman. Beau is a member of Suma Wholefoods Worker Cooperative. Many of you listening will probably recognize the name, I'm sure, seeing as Suma has been a pioneer in the whole food industry since 1977, and their products are sold all over the UK. Suma is one of the largest worker cooperatives in the UK, with around 200 worker members working in their warehouses in Halifax. Beau works for Suma as the People Development Coordinator, but also continues to do shifts on the warehouse floor and invoicing and data entry, emphasizing the value of multi-skilling in working cooperatively. Suma is also the largest equal pay cooperative in Europe, a principle they are extremely proud of. Beau, welcome to Punchcard. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks very much, Caleb. It's a pleasure to be talking to you.
In your own words, how would you describe a worker cooperative?
Simplest distillation of that is that it's run by the workers for the workers. We get a lot of holiday, which is lovely. We get a good fair wage, certainly for the area, a very good wage. And that's equal. We're all paid exactly the same. So we don't all fall out about who's getting a bit more and all this sort of thing. We don't jockey for position and try and beat each other up career ladders. Do you know what I mean? There's none of that nonsense that you might get in a more hierarchical business or one without equal pay. So generally just quite good conditions and rights as members as well, decent pension, all that kind of thing. We're certainly not millionaires. We're not all here sitting on mansions and driving Bentleys, but certainly it's a comfortable income. It's comfortably above minimum wage. I mean, unfortunately, warehouse work in the UK is really poorly paid generally. There's a lot of Amazons and variations on Amazon, which are just pretty horrible and oppressive workplaces, but also just they pay the absolute minimum that the law requires them to. And we kind of do the opposite. We pay as much as we can. We don't want to rip our customers off. We do actually really care about our customers. A lot of the time they're friends. Some of them have been with us since '77. So we don't want to whack our prices right up and charge our customers too much. And we don't want end users to pay too much because we want to promote whole foods as well. That's really important. So we want to take a fair wage within the constraints of that. But more than any of that, we've got a good culture. Generally, I mean, it's a nice place to be most of the time. I'm also looking out on the hills of West Yorkshire and trees, which is quite nice. It isn't always like that when you're in the warehouse at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, but generally there's a lot of camaraderie here. There's a lot of solidarity, active solidarity. If you're struggling with something at work, people will come and help you. You'll be batting them off almost when you've got a problem in the warehouse because the vibe is generally really good. At Suma, we've got a canteen. We get a free meal made with our own whole foods every day, which is absolutely delightful. I could really off a list of the lovely meals that we get, but everything from pizzas to wonderful bean stews. We get a free pallet where you get some of the goods that we can't sell for whatever reason. We're actively looking for worker cooperators, people with strong values, people who share the sort of same values that Suma was founded on and hopefully continues to try and uphold.
You grew up in rural Dorset, so much further south than you are now. What was that like? Did your early experiences form your politics?
I grew up really close to one of the birthplaces of trade unionism in England, and environmental concerns were quite big for me from a really young age. I had a decent upbringing. My mum was a single parent who didn't have a lot of money. She was on benefits growing up, but I had the luck to be growing up on benefits in a village in beautiful rural Dorset. What got me into politics, I suppose, was music, really, partly from my mum's influence, some of that stuff like Bob Dylan and early political music, but also kind of punk and stuff like The Clash, the Stiff Little Fingers, the Dead Kennedys, the stuff that I started listening to when I was about 12 and staying up late and recording things off the telly. All that stuff really shaped my political education from a young age and probably put me at odds with teachers a little bit at school and later the police somewhat as well.
My mum also was very into Dylan, and so I got some of that from my mum, and my dad liked The Clash, so I also got that. And I had never really thought of that as like things that maybe did impact my own politicization. So yeah, interesting of you to say that. You've told me before as well that you didn't quite get along with school. Do you think did the kind of the anarchism and the punkiness lead to you not getting along well with school?
I mean, I would say school didn't get along with me.
Or yeah, yeah, or the other way around
No,
is what I was going to say. Yeah.
they diagnosed me with ADHD back 20 years ago, back before that was something that people wanted to get diagnosed with. I basically got a bit bored. I was more interested in chatting up the women, trying to be funnier, and did get into some trouble. I did unfortunately get expelled in the end. Luckily, managed to finish my GCSEs. I then went to college and unfortunately also got kicked out of college. Eventually got through college and got me A levels then, and then I went to uni and dropped out of that. Those sort of educational settings didn't really work for me. I started out doing weekend work in this fairly awful meat factory, and I stuck that out as long as I could cope with it. I mean, it was the kind of place where people would turn up and they'd like instantly quit. It was just nasty. It was just hierarchical. There was bossy managers ordering people around. There was racism just totally rife in the workplace. I worked in bakeries, starting at 4 in the morning, super hot. I had really long hair at the time, and I had to wear this stupid hairnet, and just all of it just felt really crap, actually. And it was those kind of early work experiences that encouraged me back into education each time. I did go back in the end to university the second time and fairly smashed it. Did pretty well in the end. University allows a bit more autonomy, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was at uni that you got more into activism, right? Or did you do some down south as well?
No, the thing that got me into all that really was I remember sitting there bored in rural Dorset one day, and someone came on the news about the G8 conference, which was going to be up in Scotland, Glen Eagles golf course in 2005. And I remember there being a load of stuff about how there was going to be a clown army and there was going to be the People's Golfing Association and they were going to reclaim the golf courses for the proletariat and stuff like that. It was all very silly. It was all very sort of absurdist activism and anarchist activism as well. There was a big eco village that was going to be created, and all of this, a kid who fancied himself as a radical but hadn't really done a right lot, living in rural Dorset, was like, oh, this is really exciting. I basically got together with one of my mates and we packed probably quite a lot of booze and not a whole lot of anything else, and jumped in my tatty old Rover and drove all the way to Scotland and found ourselves basically on these marches and pushing through these police lines, and it was all pretty radical, pretty exciting, and something that like, wow, this is a whole other world, and it was the tail end of that anti-globalization movement or ultra-globalization movement, and there was a lot of people from all around the world attending that convergence. So actors from America, Italy, Spain, and it felt really global, it felt really positive, and really like just something that makes me hell yeah, like it changed my life. That week up there in Scotland totally changed my life.
And then yeah, so you continued to build, I guess, your activism or practice your activism while you were then learning about direct democracy at Lancaster.
I went to Lancaster Uni in 2007, a couple of years later. That was great. Lancaster's just a really beautiful city. There's loads of really radical folk. Lots of people that have been involved in that movement actually happen to live there. It had a good vegan scene a little bit before veganism was as mainstream as it is now. So that still felt quite like fresh and radical and exciting. But I think initially, you're a teenager, you're like 18, you're going up there and you're getting stampeded by cows and scrapping the riot police and stuff. And that was all quite exciting. But then you start to think, well, what else? Like, what are we building? Rather than what are we just trying to change? What are we just trying to stop? Are we just like sitting in roads and blocking the world leaders? Or are we actually going to try and build a better society? Are we going to try and do something different ourselves? It wasn't so much the study in itself, but the people that you meet along the way, the connections that you form. It's all about people, isn't it? Yeah, I met some amazing people there. I met Matt Wilson, who wrote the wonderful book Rules Without Rulers, which was based on his own doctoral thesis. I totally recommend to any listeners who aren't aware of that book. It's a really, really good exploration of direct democracy, far better than anything I've ever achieved. I mean, I did do a degree. I did a undergrad, then a master's, specifically looking at kind of consensus decision making, direct democracy. Like I say, Matt's work far surpasses any of my own, but I was exposed to all these really great thinkers. Another guy called Sam Clarke, who wrote a book called Living Without Domination, which again, based on his doctoral thesis, really good book. I started out work for a woman called Pam Lewis, who is absolutely amazing, one of the pioneers of biodiverse wildflower gardening. She's written fantastic books on creating wildflower meadows, incredibly smart, really, really wise, really knew her subject. Absolutely someone who just walked the walk. Very humble, really just wonderful woman. She was able to show me that work can be positive, that work can be for a good cause. You don't just want to be angry with your parents, the teachers, the other people in society. You know, you don't want to be pissed off with everything that eats you. That does you in sooner or later. Just end up in jail probably, or on drugs or whatever. So working out what am I really angry about? Like, what can I really change? Where can I be useful? What bit can I contribute to? And moving away from that kind of slightly naive teenage notion that you're going to somehow save the world like some sort of, half-cocked Cape Crusader. It's like, what can you really do though? Like, what real positive difference in the fairly short lifetimes that we get?
And how did that then build towards leading you to Suma?
I was aware that there were these things called housing co-ops that were maybe a bit like student houses, but a bit less grotty. And there were these things called workers co-ops where people worked in a more egalitarian way. So I was aware of those things, but it was Single Step in Lancaster. Still got some great friends working there. It's a lovely shop. It really is like a time capsule, actually, and I mean that in a really positive sense. If you're ever in Lancaster, go into Single Step. It smells like, I imagine, the 1970s smell. It smells of Whole Foods, and it smells wholesome, and it looks wholesome, and it just is wooden and natural and a lovely, lovely shop. I'd go in there and I'd buy stuff. I'd buy stuff loose. It was probably a bit before zero waste took off. Go in, you fill up a paper bag with some basmati rice or some lentils or whatever, and actually cheap. Because you're not paying for that packaging. So when I was a student in Lancaster, I was going in there and I was buying bags of red lentils and basmati rice and just making really basic dal and then freezing loads of it and just living on that. So I had a bit more money to spend on beer and things. And so I got to know Single Step as a workers co-op, and I liked the idea. I know some of the people that work there who had been involved in some of those protests as well. And so it's those fostering those connections. That got me interested. I think I applied for a job there. I didn't get it. Definitely not still bitter. I got to know about Suma through Single Step, because Single Step obviously stocks Suma products, and you read the back of your tin of coconut milk or tin of tomatoes or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, there's a really big one. Oh, it's not just like 6 people running a little shop in Lancaster. This is a bigger movement. There's lots of history there, and it's a really big one, and maybe I could get a job there. Hold that thought, and then like 4 or 5 years later, I ended up finally applying. I think it took me 3 times to get in here. It's not easy to come work at Suma. People really want to work here.
When you get applications, there's like lots of applications.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a really good problem to have, so I ain't complaining about it. But yeah, one of my jobs up here is to screen all the applications for warehouse work. I don't do all the recruitment at Suma, but I lead on the warehouse recruitment with hundreds of applications just to work in our warehouse. And that's not even for like membership of the co-op. That's for a 12-month picking contract in the warehouse. We've got to try and choose the people that cohere with our values. Obviously, we look for relevant experience, and that's a really important thing as well. They have to be able to do the job. The work itself is quite tough, quite physical, quite late hours, things like that. You don't have to be vegetarian, you don't have to be vegan, but we definitely are interested in finding like-minded people that are going to kind of promote the worker co-op cause, people that have got a bit of the DIY culture about them, that are going to get stuck in, not kind of ignore something, go, oh, it's not my job. We're looking for co-owners, basically, people that are going to behave like owners.
And so how was it when you joined?
I think I applied once and didn't get an interview. I applied a second time, did get an interview, but didn't get the job. And then a couple of months later, they phoned me up and said, well, you didn't get the job, but do you want to come and do some picking and just see how you get on? I think reading between the lines, they probably thought, well, what's this guy about? He's just got a load of activist experience, and that's not really work experience. We're not really sure. So they thought, let's put him in the warehouse and see how he gets on. And so I think I was quite aware of that. And I was like, right, I've really got to make this work. I had a young kid by this point, and my daughter Indy was pretty young. We needed an income, like I had to make it work. So I worked my socks off to smash it in the warehouse and did do a good job. And luckily then got to apply for trial membership of the co-op and then became a trial member. I was really heavily involved in the Preston New Road anti-fracking protests at the time. So I was trying to sort of two-time Suma with anti-fracking and being a dad. I'd have 3 days where I worked at Suma, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then I'd go to Preston New Road and have 2 days of trying to stop them fracking, and then a weekend with me partner and my kid, and yeah, just about managed to do it all.
Yeah, jam-packed. That sounds.
Busy than bored, though, isn't it? We say that a lot at Suma. It's much better to be busy than bored. Life's short. Let's get on with it. Do you know what I mean?
I like the idea that Suma is maybe one of the only employers, or maybe worker co-ops in general, that would employ someone whose only experience is activism.
Well, it wasn't. Like, I had loads of experience, but some of it I couldn't talk about. I couldn't tell, yeah, I worked for 2 years in a meat factory. I think I might have just left that bit off. I thought, well, I was probably under 18 then, so maybe I didn't need to mention that, or they definitely won't give me a job if I say I work there. But I actually hated it. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like a cheerleader for meat factories or anything, but I was certainly a bit embarrassed about that. I was able to draw an activism in me Suma interview and fatherhood, because for the first couple of years I was doing a lot of the childcare. My partner was doing a PhD. She's an incredibly smart woman and was studying at the time and kind of actually the main breadwinner, subverting some traditional gender roles. So I did a lot of that, staying at home with my daughter, which was amazing. Quite hard to kind of spin that into like stuff that employers want to hear about, but luckily Suma is a worker co-op and not a traditional employer. And actually those life experiences are valid. I think I'm a reasonably decent worker cooperator, and a big part of that is those formative experiences. It's a unique place, but I would definitely find it hard to leave just because of the loveliness of it, and it is just so different to a traditional workplace, and I wouldn't have fitted in a corporate environment. I would have struggled to put a suit on and shave every day. I mean, that's effort, isn't it? And who wants to waste effort shaving every day when there's a world to save?
If you're enjoying Punchcard, then consider supporting us by giving us as little as £1 a month, which is only £12 a year. If you too want to help shift the conversation away from privately owned businesses to worker-controlled alternatives, then go to our funding page, which is at opencollective.com/workerscoop/podcasts/punchcard. The link will be in the show notes. Open Collective might be a new platform to some of you. It's a bit like Patreon, but not run by venture capitalists. The job for the People Development Coordinator came up and you jumped for it. Were you interested specifically in that role, or you were just sick of the packing yard?
I actually really liked picking. It's just really active. It's quite repetitive. I don't think anyone's going to go on record as saying, yeah, it's a great life-affirming job. It is really tough physical work. And I have so much respect for our pickers. They do tough work. They do it late at night. Some of them do it all through the night. They do it early in the morning. I enjoyed the picking. The role came up not long after I got membership, about a year, I think, after I got membership. I continued picking and stuff like that. And the role came up and I looked at it and thought, I wonder if there's some good I can do with that. That was what I was looking at, really. Because obviously there's quite a big responsibility with it. You're recruiting people and reviewing people, and in some sad cases, dismissing people have been part of a decision to dismiss someone. Never met something. I never have had to, luckily. I wouldn't do it. You need a few people in difficult decisions, co-ops or otherwise. But yeah, I thought, is the potential for good here? Can I be part of recruiting some great people to Suma? Maybe. I wouldn't blow my own trumpet and say I'm amazing at it, but I am pretty proud that I've recruited some great people. I just interviewed them. I didn't do much work. They did the work. Worker co-ops are about the workers. I've just been lucky enough to interview some of them and review some of them. It's every bit as horrible as it is lovely when you have to make a horrible decision. And, those decisions are probably harder in worker co-ops. Like, we agonise over them more here, I imagine, than some workplaces. We try and deal with issues informally if issues do come up. And this kind of work would be called HR in corporate business, right? Like, we don't call it that at Suma because we don't believe human beings are resources. That's really important. We don't treat people like cogs or like robots. People are more than that. People are all ends in themselves, right? Because it's Suma, there's that chance to be part of recruiting great people into the co-op, and that feels like an absolute privilege. You're having all these balances and conundrums as a worker co-op, particularly as a bigger one and as a successful one. It's like, we have to remain profitable. We have to exist within this capitalist economy. We want to do as right by our workers as we possibly can, as much of the time as we possibly can. But for example, we've got to get the orders picked in a certain time, so we have to work at a certain rate. We've all got to contribute a pretty decent amount. So we do have things like targets. We do have things like error rates that we look at. It isn't like those kind of temporary autonomous zones that I talked about before with activism, where it's kind of like just everyone doing what they want. We've got laws that govern us. We've got market forces that govern us as well in capitalism. And I think that's worth remembering with worker co-ops, that they really are really good. All the ones I've experienced in different ways have been great, but they're still within that wider economy, and they aren't the whole solution necessarily.
What changes have you kind of overseen in the recruitment process, and potentially tips and tricks that other co-ops might be able to learn from?
We have some wonderful people here. We had some wonderful people here before I started. We've still got a lot of them because people don't tend to leave. It seems really nice. So we do retain a lot of great people, which is wonderful. So one of the things that I've been banging a drum about for years, and in recent years becoming more and more effective at, is running like rolling trial member recruitment. So we're not just relying on loads of people who are just workers, but we're bringing as many of them as possible, as regularly as possible, into equal co-ownership of the co-op. They're not always getting it because it's still a recruitment process and it is still competitive internally. But the idea is to kind of run that process every 6 months until there is very few fixed term workers left and people are co-owners together, because we're a workers co-op, and that is what we should be aiming for. We used to vote. Was getting to a point where it was like democracy over HR law, where basically someone would start as a trial member at Suma. So they were training essentially on probation for being a member of the co-op and being a co-owner with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And basically they get to the end of this probation process, this trial process, and then everyone who was already a member would vote on whether or not this new person got to be a member. So I had to go through that in whenever it was 2017 when I became a member. 2018 it must have by the time I got here. And I remember going to pub the night before, and I'd saved up all my holiday, and I was thinking, God, they're going to vote me out. They're not going to like me. They're going to think I'm too bloody cocky or too gobby, or that I don't work. I know God knows whatever. I'm going to get voted out, and I'm done. And obviously, luckily, that didn't happen for me. But not long after I got membership, that was changed, and we don't vote people into membership anymore, which I do think is the right thing. So I support people through those probation periods or trial periods or trainee periods, whatever you want to call it. Those periods are a bit shorter. They're generally 6 months now rather than 9 months. We recruit people to come and work in the warehouse for like 12 months. They'll start on a contract picking in the warehouse. They're a contracted worker. They're not a member. They can't vote on stuff at Suma. They don't have quite the same level of rights and responsibilities as the members do. They would apply for this trial membership process. If they're successful, they then enter into the kind of trial period to become a co-owner of the co-op. They go on like tour, really, of going to all these different departments. They spend 2 hours with them and they learn a little bit about sales. They learn a bit about buying. They might do a couple of hours in the canteen, whatever. And then at the end of that process, they give examples of how they're meeting our member standards throughout that 6-month process. They'll be building up a body of evidence that says, yes, I am working for the collective good, or I am flexible, or whatever. We've got 7 of these member standards. If all is good, if it is indeed true that they are demonstrating all these member standards very conclusively, then they are made a member, and I write a recommendation, and that's then basically verified by personnel. Personnel have to read over that and agree to it. We really emphasise peer feedback, and sometimes people are too busy to do it. Sometimes it isn't used all that much. Sometimes it just creates animosity, but done well, peer feedback is wonderful. So every time those training members will be reviewed, They'll put out a bit of a memo to the whole co-op. They'll send an email to the whole co-op. Their picture will be on there. There'll be some comments from some coordinators where they've worked, and they'll write a bit about what they've done in the last few months or whatever. And then everyone in the co-op will get to read that still, and send in feedback if they've got any reflections. And we try and like frame that feedback around kind of two key questions. What do they do well? What could they do differently? It is trying to capture critical feedback, but obviously we want it constructive. It has to be like useful. It has to be something they can change. Say, I don't know, someone's really hard working when they put their mind to it, but they may be really distractible or talkative or something. You know, feedback might come in. What do they do well? Well, they really exceed their line rate. They're a really fast worker. When they're focused, what could they do differently? Bit might be they could do with being focused a bit more often, or you know, try not to distract other people. Keep the chat about cars to break time. If it's done with the intention of bettering the co-op, bettering each other as co-workers, then it should be taken positively. We've got 360 feedback, like anyone at Suma can feedback on anyone else at Suma at any time, and it might trigger a review, it will feed into the next review. To be clear, a lot of that is just positive, like it is just people basically like praising each other, bigging each other up, really, really wonderful. But you can get those really useful, constructive comments in there, and that's how it should be, in my opinion, at co-ops. Like it should be open, as long as it doesn't break the law, as long as it doesn't discriminate. If other co-ops don't have similar systems, then they should maybe think about working on something like that. Have reviews, have call-outs for feedback. Don't just go, oh, we're all doing our own thing, it's probably fine, because it'll be glossing over a load of issues. We're all human, right? Let's be really like actively humble and like aware of that and open to that criticism.
So how does a massive worker co-op make decisions or maintain that collectivism?
It is difficult. Let's say you go into the shop and you're working out what you want to buy for tea tonight, right? If you're quite an indecisive person, that might be a difficult decision. You know, what the hell do I eat tonight, right? Take two friends with you, and the three of you have got to decide, what are we going to eat tonight? And that becomes harder. Take 4 friends, 5 friends, 10 friends with you. That gets really, really hard, and you end up just having to compromise and right, we're all getting pizza.
We all know that when you're flicking through Netflix and trying to decide what film to watch, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Try doing it with 250 people, or you know, over 100, whatever, right? That is just a hard thing to do, and there is no perfect. I mean, I used to be involved in consensus decision making with activist groups, and consensus is a really like robust, really tough form of direct democracy. And one person who doesn't agree can block that decision from going through, and I mean that's really hard, because you might get 199 people that agree on something, just one really stubborn person, maybe even bloody-minded person, who just disagrees, and then you essentially flip that on its head. So rather than that being, oh, that's a really good democratic process, essentially that one person has power over the whole 199 other people who actually all agree. So, you know, at the sharp end, those direct democracies, it's really tough stuff. Suma votes basically on the big decisions. Let's say a member proposed a pay rise and the member seconded it. That would have to go to a quarterly general meeting. Funnily enough, we have 4 of them a year. And at those quarterly general meetings, we vote on proposals. The big stuff, basically. There's a lot of autonomy within teams and within zones and within areas at Suma, making day-to-day decisions, just getting on with it, essentially. We're not stopping every half an hour to make a decision as a whole co-op. We're not stopping every day or every week to make a decision as a whole co-op, because we exist in that capitalist economy, because it's tough out there and all that sort of thing. But what we absolutely do is 4 times a year, we meet up with as many people as want to come. Someone proposes it, someone seconds it, people discuss it. We have forums in the weeks running up to those meetings as well, because not everyone can always make the meeting, or you've only got a 2-hour window at that meeting. You then get to the meeting, and at the meeting, the membership votes. And some things you need a 75% majority, so like constitutional changes. The other changes, 50% majority. One of the risks there is that you get kind of Brexit level decisions. You get, 52% outvoting 48%. You get 48% of members really peeved off. That isn't a great situation, but generally the majorities are bigger than that, thankfully, at Suma. As someone who has studied direct democracy at great length for many years at university and in practice, it ain't perfect what we do, but it is a damn sight more democratic than 99% of businesses in the country as well. Like any member can propose something for a general meeting. They just need a seconder.
Do you have examples of times where it has been quite a close call and that has led to issues?
I think where it's hard is where people are too ingrained one way or another on something and just can't accept a decision. But generally, luckily, we don't see that at Suma. For the most part, people broadly agree or are able to accept disagreement. I think for me, the really key personality attribute going into collective working, collective decision making is you've got to be prepared to be wrong. You've got to be prepared to be on the losing side. You've got to be prepared to not be successful in what you want to happen. And really, you've kind of got two choices. You either accept it and keep working there and stay positive, or you basically leave. If a decision's made that you really don't agree with and you can't live with it, then you've got to think, well, do I really want to work there then with those people that have made that decision?
If somebody has an issue with something or wants to change something that somebody else is doing, how do they go about that?
If it was something kind of big, you could make a proposal to the general meeting actually, and that could get voted on. That might change the direction of the co-op. So one of the votes in recent years was about increasing the member percentage of our workers who are members, which essentially set a direction for my work. That was a high-level decision by the membership at the time to set recruitment strategy. So I had to work towards those targets. Obviously, there's loads of decisions that are made on a smaller scale. It might be harder to influence some of those. Some work can't be controlled democratically, like recruitment can't necessarily be done. But some things can be. I mean, let's say people wanted to change the way that they spoke to customers, the sort of script or the crib sheet they use to talk to customers. Let's say one of them wanted to change that. That's something someone in the team could propose. The rest of the team could look at it together and then make that change. Stuff like that should happen quite fluidly and quite organically at a workers' co-op. A lot is done old school, I would say, and quite ad hoc and quite informally. Actually, worker co-ops can be really dynamic, but you've just got to be prepared to let some people have autonomy. You can let a team go away and do a thing and let them have the autonomy to do it. You don't necessarily need to give them loads of authority over other people to do that.
You can have these kind of siloed areas where people make decisions, but then one of the ways to sort of counteract that a little bit is having multi-skilling and having people move around the roles. You work in three sort of sectors. You do a bit of warehouse stuff, you do the people stuff, you also do a bit of data stuff, and therefore you have an understanding of those three areas. And so can, feed into the decision making and the changes that are made within there without it needing to go to a big meeting.
When we were really small, we might have all done 10 different jobs or whatever, but the scope for that doesn't really exist when you're this big, and you need consistency in certain departments in certain areas. Customer service would be one potential example of that, or repping, those kind of customer-facing roles, right? You don't want to have different people repping each week and not building up those relationships with customers. You don't want to have someone different on the customer service desk every day of the week, and because they spend the first half of the day working out what the person did the day before to try and pick up that work. So you need some consistency in some roles. And you need also some expertise in some roles as well. So a role that required, for example, a really high level of knowledge in something, maybe finance type roles. You don't just want to have people dipping in and out of those, doing it for a couple of weeks or doing it one day a week or whatever. You need some ownership of those things. That said, there is so many benefits to people knowing other people's jobs, people sharing jobs, moving around, not getting just stuck in one thing completely, just getting bored with it. When we bring people in as pickers, initially they start just picking, but if they get membership, they'll almost certainly do at least one other job, often two other jobs, or maybe even more. And those jobs might be other roles in the warehouse, or they might go out driving, or they might work in an office or whatever. And culturally is a massive benefit there, seeing things from other perspectives. And equal pay obviously plays into that. If you're paying everyone the same, it doesn't really matter what job they're doing. Some ways. Generally, it's a really nice leveler. But we will find that often people want to do a little bit of something else at least. Like we've got people who work in things like compliance and they do a bit of picking in the warehouse to break things up. We've got somebody who works in brand and marketing and they do a day a week in the warehouse. Saves money on going to the gym at least. And I would say that actually we're like quite a unique workers co-op. It feels quite down to earth. It feels quite real. Like we dress in our normal clothes, we work hard, we get dirty, and we're genuine people. Sometimes we get it wrong. Quite a lot of time we get it right. We're really great overall, but we're warts and all, certainly, it is not a perfect place. We don't live in a perfect world. And we make a damn good go of it, within those constraints, I would say. I think anyone involved in any co-op or considering being involved in any co-op just has to be realistic about that. It's much better to expect things might not be perfect and that you're going to have to do some work to make them better than to be expecting everything to be bread and roses, and then when it isn't, just being miffed and quitting or quiet quitting or whatever the thing is. Yeah, it's not perfect. What the hell did you expect? Stay and make it better. You know, bring your positive energy, bring your wonderful work ethic, bring all your ideas and your enthusiasm, bring your friends. You know, bring your love of Whole Foods, whatever it is, whatever co-op you're going into, you know, bring all of you and go for it. Because in small ways, we're building better worlds. You know, we're building better places to be together. If that's not too cheesy a thing to say, do you know what I mean? It's like we waste or we spend copious amounts of our days at work, copious amounts of our lives at work. Like, they should be decent places. They should be interesting, more democratic places that we're happy enough to come to. Co-ops aren't easy places to work. People shouldn't come to work at co-ops thinking, that will be a nice, easy job. It is not a nice, easy job. You are a co-owner of something. You have to put the work in. You have to have a good DIY ethos, a good work ethic, a good culture of like muck in, get stuck in. You know, that is fundamental. It isn't a place for a free ride.
Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciated it. And yeah, loved chatting to you.
Thank you so much for doing this and everything you're doing. I've shared the Punchcard thing around. People have already been listening and enjoying it at Suma. So yeah, cheers.
If you enjoyed listening, please consider supporting Punchcard by going to our Open Collective page at opencollective.com/workerscoop/projects/punchcard and starting a monthly contribution. We currently have seed funding for the first 3 episodes from workers.coop, but we will need your support to be able to keep Punchcard running after that. If you are interested in finding out more about worker cooperatives, then check out workers.coop's website. And don't be shy to send any questions you have or ask for support by emailing solidarity@workers.coop. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Punchcard is released monthly, so look out for the next episode.